Hey, welcome to the March 3rd episode of The Pipeline. I'm columnist and podcast editor Cory Morgan, and I'm with our news editor Dave Naylor today. Derek Fildebrand is usually with us for these, but he couldn't make it today, so you're stuck with just the two of us. How you doing, Dave?
I'm good. I'm actually looking forward to getting in a word edgewise with Derek not being here today. So,
Yes, you need not live in terror of what may happen if there's a ping on your computer.
Exactly. Hopefully he doesn't tune in later and watch it. So
we'll hear about it later. He'll get over it.
I'm sure.
So this is the show, though, where we cover weekly issues, what's been outstanding in the news, and we have a sponsor. It's Kieran. I don't. Is that Kieran's Way or Kyron's Way? I'm so terrible this way.
Chiron.
There we go. I know it's Penny.
I talked to her yesterday, named after a Greek god. So
okay. There we go. I appreciate the correction. I mean, the text is most important, so you get to the right place for it. And she offers a good made in Alberta business. She helps counsel people who are dealing with stress, anxiety issues, past trauma, things such as that. Consultations are free. If you're looking for, hopefully, drug-free ways to deal with stress and anxiety, things such as that, Penny may be offering just the sort of service to help you along, and her sponsorship is greatly appreciated. So consider popping by the website and seeing if Penny can offer you what you need. These are stressful times. So moving on. One of the big stories today, I really never thought we'd come to this, but I guess we shouldn't be that terribly surprised. Dr. Seuss is under attack by cancel culture. He's what you would have thought the most beloved and innocuous of children's authors, and now apparently he is a hate monger. Can you expand on that a bit, Dave?
Well, apparently woke readers could not force themselves to read these Dr. Seuss classics. I think this is the most beloved children's author out there. We all grew up with the Grinch and the Cat in the Hat, but the foundation that looks after his publishing enterprise has decided they are not going to publish 6 titles because they portray people in a way that are, quote, hurtful and wrong. So he wrote 60 books. Six of them will no longer be available. Those 6 are, and to think I saw it on Mulberry Street, If I Ran the Zoo, McElligot's Pool, On to Beyond Zebra, Scrambled Egg Super, and The Cat's Quizzer. So if you had those books from your childhood, I suggest you pack them away because they could become valuable. They said the Oriental characters in his books were caricatures with yellow faces and slanted eyes, and the few black characters were again portrayed with characteristics unbecoming. And they basically said it was basically a form of white supremacy, believe it or not, Cory. So even Dr. Seuss is getting in trouble beyond the grave.
And it's just so frustrating. I mean, those were books. The reason they were so popular was kids enjoyed them. They were fun reads. And they always had a good moral and a lesson within them. I mean, they were all about getting along, loving your neighbor, being nice. I mean, thankfully, they haven't canceled the Grinch yet. There doesn't seem to be a green race that's standing up and being offended. I mean, things change with time. I know there was a number of old cartoons from back in the 30s and 40s where you would see some black people dancing around a kettle, caricatured in a way that's certainly not acceptable today. I mean, the measure of what can be done now versus back then is something altogether different. But I looked at those Dr. Seuss pictures and said, I can see if you're really squinting, okay, yeah, it's a bit of an old school. There were some, I guess, apparently with Inuit people that were demonstrated that had furred hoods around themselves and in kayaks, but this wasn't insulting. The intent wasn't to be. And what I wonder, were there any people of Asian origin who were really upset about this, or Inuit people upset about this, or is this, I suspect, the white liberal woke crowd who got upset about this.
Well, I mean, it's at some point, yeah. Every book that was ever written, every cartoon that was ever done, in the '60s and earlier, is going to be declared, bad. Didn't the Grinch kick his poor dog Max at one point? I mean, isn't that teaching animal abuse? Never mind teaching you to be a bad guy, but as you said, they taught lessons. They taught kids the wrong behavior to do, and the fact that there could be penalties to doing it. So yeah, it's I called it the baying mob of Twitter, and they've taken down Dr. Seuss, and who are they going to aim for next? Maybe us, Cory.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, just a question. So somebody did lend a comment here. If you're on Facebook, you can see it. It is a very long one, though. So if you want comments to pop up, and I'll pull them up. But if they're too long, they'll cover our whole screen. But he made some points. It's from Charles Lynch. He said the books haven't been banned, but the company's not going to publish any more editions of them. And that it'll no longer be portraying those 6 titles, but they weren't canceled because they were voluntarily withdrawn. Well, okay, I get the point, but it's yes and no. I mean, when a company is bullied by the Twitter mob into pulling something off its shelves, that's canceled. I mean, sure, you weren't legally obligated to tear it down, but they knew that they just don't want to deal with this battle, having the mob screaming at them, accusing them of everything. I mean, because again, it is a publisher that just wants to put out family-friendly publications. There's so many other classics now, though. If we start going through them with the magnifying glass, what else is coming?
Surely they're doing the magnifying glass treatment on Winnie the Pooh now, I bet you.
Oh boy. Yes, the abuse of Eeyore. I mean, they went and pinned a tail on that poor thing. Oh. But the world's gone mad. I just hope at some point people start pushing back a little. Come on, guys. We can talk to our kids about context. I mean, we could read these stories, or in our case, maybe it'll be grandkids, but still, and say, we don't depict people from up north that way anymore. But this was, how it is. I mean, it doesn't have to be just totally wiped out of oblivion. I guess Universal in Orlando has some Dr. Seuss things they're going to be pulling as well from their display because of this. I mean, what sort of vanilla milquetoast world are we going to have if we let the mobs control everything we're allowed to show or see anymore? It's just
as long as they stay away from the Hardy Boys.
Oh yes,
that's when the line will be crossed.
Oh, I remember devouring those blue hardcover books back in my younger years.
Absolutely.
So let's get a little closer to home. So we did have some lifting of the restrictions from COVID-19 this week. It was a lot of fanfare. Premier Kenney himself came out. It wasn't just a handoff to Dr. Dina Hinshaw for the announcement. So we expected a lot. And I think a lot of people were kind of underwhelmed with what step 2 turned out to be. What have you got to expand on that with, Dave?
I agree, Cory. Everybody I know was gathered around their computer watching the press conference, hoping for a lot more. But basically what they've done is they've opened up libraries to a 15% capacity, and they've given some gyms some ability to reopen. But that's all very confusing. They have to offer exercises where you don't huff and puff. You can walk on the treadmill, but you can't jog, because you might start breathing heavily. And you might, you can only do some training with a manager or a personal trainer right next to you. So very little, very, very little lowering of other regulations like restaurants and retail, it came as a bit of a surprise to me, Cory, because all the benchmarks that were needed for a full reopening we had reached. We were well below the hospitalization levels and the case numbers and the ICU levels to actually go on to step 3. But instead, they didn't even act really on step 2. They said there may be some worrying signs, and I think certainly the number of variants that are being uncovered are a worrying sign. They found 35 more cases yesterday, bringing a total 500 cases of the variant in the province, which, if I'm not mistaken, I think is the highest total of any province in the country. But I think, like you, everybody else was looking for more. It came on the heels of a story that we had on the Western Standard about ICU admissions. ICU admissions has always been a top government benchmark for restrictions. They say the restrictions had to come in to keep hospitalizations down and the healthcare system from collapsing. But we obtained internal Alberta healthcare documents that show ICU admissions have actually dropped in the last year than they were in 2019. Throughout all of 2020, only 2 hospital jurisdictions in the province had slight increases in ICU admissions. All of the Calgary hospitals were less. All of the Edmonton hospitals were less, except for the University of Alberta Hospital. Right now we've only got 50 some people in ICU. So we're, it seems to me like Albertans were almost misled on these figures, because they're well below any sort of being overwhelmed whatsoever, Cory.
Yeah, well, and so much of it just seems so arbitrary. I mean, they laid out this plan that showed a number of things potentially opening, and they used the word potentially. Okay, fair enough. You want to couch your words, and perhaps, like, if we'd have been 5 or 6 hospitalizations below the benchmark, really close to the borderline, that's where you could see, okay, we're going to utilize potential. We said potentially, but we're really close to, a possible overwhelming here. We got to back off a little bit, but I mean, we didn't just meet the 450 hospitalization benchmark. We blew it out of the water. I mean, there were only 250 people in, which is, 250 people. It shouldn't be dismissed. But if we're going to set benchmarks, we were well within it. And then not only did they just toss aside all of those things that were potentially going to be reopened or eased a bit, they jumped ahead with libraries, which were actually part of step 3, and said, we're going to allow some openings there. So they actually went past one of their benchmarks. Like, it just makes no sense. They don't seem to have any consistency. They aren't expanding on why one is more dangerous than another. Gymnasiums, it's turned controversial. I mean, very few people could argue. I know I could use some more gym time, but gymnasium use is healthy for people. It's good for your mental well-being. It's good for your physical well-being. I don't work out nearly as much as I should, but I always feel better after a good bit of exercise. Mayor Nenshi came out and dismissed it as saying it's unimportant, and that really stirred up a lot of people, but brought a lot of discussion. Like, when are we going to start allowing some more healthy activities for Albertans to get out?
Yeah, I'm not aware of a single case of transmission within a gym. It's granted, they don't know where a lot of the transmissions are coming from, but I don't think there's been a single confirmed case. So I think what Kenny has done with just such slight regulation loosening is made more people angry again. There's already MLA Drew Barnes has come out today to say he's not happy. He's calling for a regional approach because his area down in Medicine Hat doesn't have very many cases at all. So why is he being punished? Just like the same area that may be overwhelmed with cases. He says it doesn't make sense to him, and his constituents are very angry.
Yeah, well, and as was mentioned, with the ICU usage, I mean, that's the big fearful benchmark. I mean, that's the nightmare scenario. We're thinking of thousands of people coming to hospital in terrible respiratory distress, that need ventilators, that need constant care. So, I mean, we've paid for and set up field hospitals. We've been prepared. We've been ready. And it looks like, aside from it, there was some pressure when things did spike in December there. Our ICUs were never even close to being under threat. Again, how many times do they have to predict doom and gloom and be wrong before they'll start backing off?
Exactly. And you'll remember Jason Kenney in a quote that he probably regrets now, talking about body bags filling McMahon Stadium, of all things. We had a story this week on the Western Standard about our old friends at SNC Lavalin, getting $150 million contract to build field hospitals that nobody had asked for. I think certainly the province had to plan for these things. They had to make sure, because we would be the first ones jumping on them if they hadn't. But it quickly became obvious that they weren't going to be needed, and nobody seems to have been able to figure that out and what to do with these declining numbers.
Yeah, well, and they keep moving the goalposts and changing what we're supposed to be watching for. I mean, first it was deaths. Yes, that's a big concern. Well, then it went to hospitalizations. Then it went to cases. All the way through fall and into winter, it was cases. Now the cases are going down. The deaths are going down. The ICU is going down. Oh, now we got to talk about our values. Well, where does this stop? And, we've seen some horrendous bad modeling. I mean, we saw that last spring where they predicted as many as 30,000 Albertans dead. But perhaps they could be a little forgiven because we didn't know a lot about it a year ago. We were erring on the side of safety. There was a lot of concerns. But with this variant thing coming out now, and again, it feels like they're crying wolf again. The Alberta government put out again these projections showing the variants in a big, giant, swooping graph. And within weeks, we're going to be overloading our hospitals. It didn't happen. Not even close. I mean, that was over a month ago when they predicted the variants were going to slam us. They still keep talking about finding variants, but it hasn't led to this giant load of cases and hospitalizations. Yet they use that to stop these openings, and trust is being lost. How much longer business is going to have that carrot on a stick in front of them?
Exactly. And now the big issue is inoculations and the fiasco the Trudeau government has turned that into. And when Prime Minister Trudeau sees President Joe Biden promising everyone in America is going to have their inoculations by the end of May, and we're sitting here with 4% of our population done. In Israel, it's 80%. I've got elderly parents in British Columbia. They're just under 80, just by a year, but they have no idea when they're getting their inoculation. The inoculation will bring an end to everything in theory, and it will get the world back on track. But Canada just hasn't figured it out yet.
No, I mean, that's one of the areas where, we like to get on Premier Kenney's case about a number of things, but his hands have been kind of tied because that was kind of a federal program. But Canada's languished way behind third world countries in the acquisition and distribution of vaccinations. We're seeing other countries talking about, achieving herd immunity and opening up and moving along. I think Texas has 20% of the population vaccinated, and they said, you know what, we're opening the doors. We're done with this. We're moving ahead. I know there's people, henny pennies running around, or chicken littles, Texas, they're all going to die. I don't think that's going to happen. We certainly want to protect our vulnerable. We want to get them vaccinated. Those of us, I understand some people don't believe in vaccinations, but as long as the majority do, we'll deal with that. I certainly would never want to see it mandatory.
Well, in fairness, nobody has said it's got to be mandatory. Certainly, Premier Kenney has said he's against mandatory vaccinations. I guess the next thing for discussion, Cory, is going to be pandemic passports, where you might not be allowed to buy concert tickets or travel on airplanes unless you can prove you've had the inoculation. I guess that's when they become almost mandatory.
Yeah, and I could see, a lot of lawyers rubbing their hands together, and I could see our courts spending a lot of time on that. When it comes to a private business, perhaps if that's what they want is the standard to allow people to utilize their services, maybe that's okay. But now we do have some charter protected rights of travel. We can't use Section 1 forever. And if an airline is preventing somebody from getting on it and traveling because they won't have the passport, we start getting into some very dicey territory. So I could see this going on for quite a long time yet, even if the pandemic passes.
Exactly.
So moving on to things that also have been illegalized is having religious services. So Pastor Coates is still in jail, and he was due to have a hearing today. It looks like it's been deferred. What's up with that, Dave?
Yeah, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom was going to be representing Coates in court today. It's been bumped for one day. It'll take place tomorrow. We all know the story of Coates arrested last month for refusing to stop preaching and breaking COVID requirements of having only 15% capacity in his church. He had hundreds and hundreds of people. 2 bail hearings so far. He has refused to commit to stop preaching. So he stays in jail. His wife says he's lost weight. He's suffering from neck problems now. He's only allowed out of his cell twice a day for 15 minutes at a time for a shower or to exercise. It's unbelievable the conditions that he's being kept in. But his Grace Life Church is continuing. The last 2 Sundays since he's been in jail, they proceeded with services. The RCMP and Health Services attended both of them, publicly said that they've breached the law again. But I don't think the RCMP knows what to do now. Both of their press releases say we are discussing about what next steps to take. So do they continue throwing a pastor a week from that church into jail? Surely the RCMP and the government know how bad these optics look, and that's why they haven't come up with anything yet. All they're doing is holding discussions. So it'll be interesting to see tomorrow. I don't see Coates capitulating and agreeing to stop preaching. So it'll be interesting to see if a judge does give him bail. If not, this trial is not scheduled till May, so we'll be in there for a while.
Well, that's certainly, a lot of people are getting put into a lot of hard positions over all of this. I'm of a mind of pushing for more relaxation of restrictions and allowing these gatherings. I mean, I haven't seen evidence that has passed, religious services have caused any widespread infections or deaths or issues, but it's difficult. If you've got laws that are set, the government has to try and follow through with them. And again, the optics, though, of taking preachers off to jail. I mean, we've got a lot of world history of religious leaders being imprisoned by the state, and it brings a lot of triggers to a number of people. That's the reason that every democratic state on earth protects free religion. This is just a disaster. I mean, more churches are going to be standing up. And again, it's this government's poor policy, bouncing around with where they're enforcing, where they're not, when they're opening, when they're not. I see more rebelliousness coming, whether from churches or whether from businesses. Because, I mean, again, it gets told, oh, don't worry, in 3 weeks you'll be able to open because of this. Oh, I don't know that. You move the bar again. You might change it again in the 11th hour. I don't believe you anymore.
Yeah, in fairness, Cory, it's not just Alberta. That barbecue joint owner in Ontario, Etobicoke, if I remember correctly, was slapped with $180,000 worth of fines this week. I'm sure a lot of it will get raised in the GoFundMe by supporters, but imagine a small business being fined that amount of money and being able to continue. And as you said, the frustration at the moving goalposts is mounting, not just amongst clergy, but amongst businessmen. And clearly the tipping point is close.
Yeah, well, and getting to a bit of that. So tomorrow night, Danielle Smith's been holding regular specials with the Western Channel or Western Standard on these live streaming channels, and she will be speaking to the wife of Pastor Coates. So I imagine we'll get some very direct updates on this status on where things are sitting with James Coates and where they're looking to go ahead with. Should be an interesting watch, if nothing else. I mean, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel or Facebook, and as well, subscribe. So I'll get to some of that stuff too that Derek hits at the start. I'm going to put it towards the middle end of the show here.
Sorry, Cory. It would be nice if the pastor does get bail, and maybe he can join his wife with Danielle.
Absolutely, that would make for a fantastic. You can speak much more directly to it. I mean, it's well worth tuning in to see what's going on there with this issue. And to see that these people aren't monsters, they're not crazed criminals. There's some of the irony of the whole thing too. I mean, we've released a great number of offenders from jails for fear of COVID spread within jails. And we're filling those empty jail spots with people who did the terrible crimes such as holding a religious service. Boy, the world is in a crazy place. It really is. So yeah, just getting back as well to the Western Standard and coverage of these things, the stories. Some people may have already realized you're limited in the amount of stories you can get to now. There is a paywall, but it's well worth subscribing to be able to see those detailed things that Dave writes, those great stories, and keeping up on local Alberta news that the mainstream media just doesn't touch. I mean, they don't go there. They haven't changed, and that's why the Western Standard is rising up and doing as well as it has so far. So, but what do you think? I mean, we could see that the pastor being released on bail, but I can't see the government backing off on charges. Do you?
Well, they did with the owner of the Whistle Stop. They paid for his legal bills and dropped it. He still got public health charges, I guess. But if they let him go, then the presiding judge is going to have to admit that his predecessors made the wrong decisions, I guess, especially if he vows to continue to preach, the Sunday after he gets out. And in a way, it puts the judges in between a rock and a hard place also, Cory. They've got to interpret these laws. The RCMP have to interpret the laws, and nobody really seems to know what to do in this case.
Yeah, well, I mean, as much as it makes it so difficult to make judgments and choices, I mean, we should be happy. This didn't turn into the plague that a lot of people were warning us it would. We aren't, filling McMahon with body bags. We aren't seeing spiking infections. I mean, I do think a lot of the pushback is still based on common sense. I mean, we're careful. If we saw evidence that people are really being harmed, if this was really transmitting and spreading and hitting a lot of people, I think your average person can say, look, guys, you're just going to have to continue the virtual services for a while. But as we keep, they keep crying wolf, and as they keep moving the goalposts, we're going to see more rebelliousness on a number of levels, I think.
As those ICU documents that we obtained point out, the average age of death of a COVID victim in Alberta is 82. And 82 is also the average life expectancy in the province. So, certainly every death is tragic, and there have been deaths in people even as low as their 20s. The majority of them are elderly victims, and again, not to diminish their loss or the family's loss, but it increases the sense that the general population really doesn't have a lot to fear.
No, and I mean the nature of this virus is interesting. I did more reading on the Spanish flu, because originally, it's funny, you don't hear people comparing it to that any longer, because if you look at it, that one was a pandemic that really was age specific in a lot of ways too, but it hit children and it hit the young very hard, and surprisingly it actually left the elderly alone. This is kind of the opposite. And when I used to work in the eastern states, I think I talked about that before, I got a thing for cemeteries. I love touring them, looking around, and it was horrific when you get into areas of 1917, 1918, you'd see entire families over the course of 2 months that were buried in a plot. Like, clearly the flu just decimated them. Thankfully, we're not in anything like that, and it's not robbing 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds of a long, long lifetime. And I know it sounds terribly cold, but I mean, yes, it sounds like it is taking people who were kind of on the tail end. I mean, it's robbing them of a few months, not a number of decades and years, which is still a robbery of a few months. We want to keep ourselves alive as long as possible, elderly or with pre-existing conditions or not. And we should isolate those people and really try to protect them as much as possible. But realistically, yes, if we're healthy and young, the odds of this getting us, I mean, as people said, you got a better chance of dying on a drive to work than actually dying from this virus at this point.
It is. As you said, we live in a different world now, a world that can cancel Dr. Seuss. So
yeah,
crazy times.
Yeah, well, I'll close it off there, I think. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe to the Western Standard. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We get those regular specials. You might miss it. It's great to get in live, because things that Danielle is doing, there's Q&A, there's questions. It's always going to be posted for you to watch later, as with this show, but if you want to get in there and get your words in, this is best to get it live. And yeah, thanks. I'll let Dave get back to writing those great stories, and we'll see what kind of lunacy we've got to talk about next week.
A few good ones coming up this afternoon, Cory. Make sure you check the website.
You bet. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.